Hello, good afternoon. My name's. Thank you for turning up to this session. You're going to hear from sort of three, leading experts in this space. I'll let them do introductions in a second or two. And Abby, I think the background was that you and I had both worked on content for the Association of CPAs last summer. I think we're both coming at it from different angles. And the more that I was talking with you and your colleagues about what you were doing, it just seems a fascinating topic. And interestingly, one that we were getting a lot of demand for on the training side was, what are the implications of RPA and robots in the whole audit space, and so suddenly there was a whole minefield of opportunity and challenges that I saw opening up. So I really appreciate you taking time to do this. Do you want to give us a bit of background as to how you get involved, what your history is, and what led you to this place? Yeah, Abby, do you want to just let us know a bit about your background? How you got to this?
Yeah, sure. So hi, we are from Rutgers Business School, Continuous Audit and Reporting Lab. So today we are going to present our work related to RPA in the audit area. And today, Professor Miklos Vasarhelyi, myself, Abigail, Zhang, and Andrea Rozario will do the presentation together. And Andrea will talk about the first part of the presentation, and I will take over the rest. So Andrea and I are both PhD students at Rutgers Business School, and Professor Vasarhelyi is a KPMG distinguished professor in the AIS domain. So yeah, that's it.
Excellent. And just a quick bit of background: when did you get involved in RPA? What was the kind of the trigger point? What opened your eyes up to this space?
Yeah, sure. So we basically started a couple of RPA projects about 1.5 years ago. And the motivation is that RPA has been used in the finance domain, in the accounting domain, but in the auditing area, we still see a slow progress. That's why we started to look at the indication of RPA in the audit domain. And we basically cooperated with several medium-sized CPA firms and work with them to see the potential of RPA in the audit area. Yeah.
And just before you jump in, what were the barriers you were seeing? Why do you think it's not been adopted more quickly in your field?
You mean why RPA is slow in the audit domain?
Yeah. I mean, from my side of things, compliance audit, this is kind of a stunning kind of technology for those spaces. So I'm interested to see what you're.
Right. So yeah. So one of our colleagues, he went to interview like the big four accounting firms and ask why RPA is having a slow progress in the audit area. And the common answer that they received is that the auditing profession is a highly regulated profession. So any progress in terms of technology, it tend to be slow because of all the regulations faced with auditors. So most of the RPA projects are still in the pilot stage. However, in other areas, for example, tax and advisory, the RPA is quite, I cannot say mature, but it's developing faster than what's happening in the audit area. And so that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that since more and more firms, clients, are using RPA, but the auditors need to also be aware of this condition because maybe there could be extra risks introduced by the RPA. So, however, not like most of the auditors haven't realized this. So that's also the current situation of this whole RPA domain in the audit.
Excellent. And I think from my side of things, it's interesting because, you know, a lot of the challenges around auditing bots are kind of the same challenges as auditing other things, but people still need to go through the discipline of working out, you know, how to apply traditional audit purposes to in an automated environment or a bot-driven environment. But sorry, I probably shouldn't interrupt too much, but I'll let you get on.
Okay, so I think Andrea, you can start the first part.
Okay, sure. Also, just to add on to what Abby was talking about, you know, why it may be a little bit slower to adopt RPA to auditing, to the auditing industry. You know, we're seeing that even for public accounting firms that are doing pilot tests for RPA, they're doing this for non-public clients. So this goes back to what Abby said about, you know, auditing being highly regulated. So just as, I guess, a little bit more insight into where accounting firms are at this moment with applying RPA technology. So we know that, you know, robotic process automation, you all probably have heard about this new technology, and essentially why robotic process automation is so prevalent across various industries right now is because it has the potential to, I guess, form a more integrated process by automating procedures or process activities that are very repetitive and that are very structured. So what's different about RPA when you compare it to traditional automation is that RPA is software that it's very easy to use. So if you want to program a bot to, you know, go to a website and fetch some information, it should take you less time than if you were to program using Python, right? So that's one of the reasons as to why we here in the Car Lab are seeing that professionals in different industries are using RPA to automate. So Abby and I are briefly going to cover the topics of how we can audit the client's RPA, and also auditing with RPA, using RPA as an audit data analytic tool. So auditing a client's RPA, this is an interesting, I hear some background noise, sorry. So auditing a client's RPA is interesting because it essentially creates a new type of IT audit, right? So we have to, as auditors, internal auditors, we have to audit the system, the ERP that the client has. But now with these RPA bots, we have to audit the bots, right, to make sure that they are programmed correctly. And also to make sure that the expected output that the bots are supposed to produce, that it's really what they're producing, which goes back to the programming of the bots. So these are just some RPA statistics. Statista estimated that this industry is going to grow tremendously to 3.1 billion by 2019 and 4.9 billion by 2020. So you see that there is a need to audit your client's RPA because we're seeing a lot of RPA adoption, not just in the finance or retail industries, but across a variety of industries. Okay, so risk of RPA programs. So, you know, RPA can obviously reduce the risk of human error in transposing the data from one source to another source, but it does introduce new risks, right? So these are something that internal auditors have to be cognizant about. First of all, thinking about what are these new risks, and also how do they address those risks to make sure that these RPA bots are compliant with rules and regulations. So these are some examples of risks in RPA programs, there could be an appropriate access to the RPA programs. So this gets to the concept of segregation of duties, like who has access to these RPA bots, and are those the right individuals to have access to these bots? And also from an RPA bot perspective, you also have to think about the concept of SOD, of segregation of duties. So with RPA, you can automate potentially large parts of a process. So assume that you automate about 80% of a process. You can do that. However, you have to ask the question, if we use this one bot to perform this, 80% of this process, are we as a company still compliant with SOX regulations? So what we are seeing in practice is that although RPA can be, or the one bot for RPA can be used to automate the majority of the process, there's actually several different bots that have different responsibilities, right? And this is done to make sure that these bots are in compliance with SOX, because we don't want to violate SOD even with RPA. So this is something that would be important to consider. There's also the issue of data security. We need to make sure that RPA has access to the right data, and that when it does produce the results for performing specific tasks, that it goes to the appropriate individuals. And it's also the risk of weak maintenance of bots, as well as other risks.
So sorry, can I just ask a question on that last slide? Has there been any research done on where these are kind of the potential risks, but has there been any research done to actually say, well, actually the majority of risks are in the data security side, or in the bad design? Have you seen anything actually trying to look at what's really happening, where the real risks are?
So this is still an emerging area of research. So where we are from a research perspective is seeing where the RPA can be applied. And from having conversations with some professionals in practice, we are seeing that inappropriate access to RPA programs is a real problem. And the concept of segregation of duties, this concept has been around since SOX was required. SOX compliance was required, but in light of these new technologies like RPA, we're starting to see that there could be a need to sort of rethink segregation of duties from the RPA perspective. Because assume that we have a bot that is executing parts of the process appropriately, and it's not being manipulated by a human, and we have to think about the fact of whether SOX is still relevant in some aspects. Because if the human is not manipulating the bot, and the bot is executing the activities as is expected to, then perhaps we need to rethink this concept. So that's where we are from a research perspective.
Okay, excellent.
Okay. So the goal of auditing the RPA would be to make sure that in the current state of things, the current state of legislation, that we need to make sure that these bots are designed to be compliant with SOX regulations as well as other regulations, and to essentially make sure that the business logic that it's embedded in these bots is correct, right? We also want to make sure from a data perspective that RPA is using the data that it's supposed to be using, and that it's disseminating this data to the appropriate individuals or the appropriate parties. So some ideas of how auditors can audit the RPA. Well, first, we need to understand these programs, right? So we need to conduct some walkthroughs. We can request documentation from the client, starting from how many bots are you using, in which part of the process, and which process activities are these bots performing and how are these bots maintained. You also want to make sure that you observe the process that is being performed by bots and also talk to the RPA users to understand how these bots are being used. And also from your observation, you will gather whether these bots are really being used like they're supposed to be used. So that's the perspective of auditing a client's RPA. So now moving on to a different perspective, to using this technology, RPA technology, to perform better audits. So now to leverage this as a tool to perform auditing. So here we have a framework that can guide auditors to use RPA in their audits, right? So auditing, we know that it lags behind in terms of innovation, but actually RPA, it's a very, very good technology to apply auditing to because it is the less or the least disruptive by far. So that's why it's more feasible from our perspective to apply RPA to auditing. So some of the things that auditors may want to think about when considering RPA usage in their audits is to think about what process they want to automate. So practically any process can be automated, but we really have to take into account what are the benefits of automating this process versus the cost, right? So we want to think about what is the actual output. Is the actual output going to result into process improvements? And then once we do that as auditors, we have to identify the best candidates so that we can target one of those candidates. So from an RPA perspective, ideally we want to target the low-hanging fruit and go for those tasks that are very, very structured, but they're so mundane, right? Like the process of collecting data. So this is something that it's fundamental to the audit, but doesn't require judgment and can easily be automated. So from that, from the process identification phase, we can move on to understanding the process. So this is where we would break down the process into very, very small pieces so that we can use those pieces and convert them to functions to embed into the RPA bots, right? Because these little pieces are the steps that the RPA bot is going to perform. So in addition to that, and this is something that doesn't really get talked about very often, but we think that it is essential to really be able to exploit RPA to its maximum, to its full potential. This is the concept of audit data standardization, right? So the RPA, if you train the RPA to copy and paste, the RPA will do that. But the RPA is going to do that following a very, very specific format. So if you use the RPA on a file that's formatted differently, it's going to perform the task, but it's not going to give you the right results. So this is why it's important to have an audit data standard. So in this audit data standard, you have labels that are named in a very consistent format, right? So if you have your client that has 5 files, but those files have the same labels, the same values, but the labels are different, I should say, then in this audit data standard, you want to make sure that these values are captured by the same label. So this is a way to format the data in a consistent manner so that the RPA can process the task that is expected to process. Once we have the data into a consistent format, then we understand the process from beginning to end, then we can move on to the prototyping of these audit apps. So we can think of audit apps as RPA audit bots. So this is the programming of these bots. And then we want to be able to measure implementation of RPA. So we want to make sure that this RPA is resulting in high ROI, right? So we want to come up with some measures for efficiency. Is the RPA really reducing the amount of time that it takes for this task to be executed? And also from a quality perspective, is the RPA able to perform a better job? Is it able to detect errors when errors are present?
What about the quantity element as well? The ability to do more sampling?
Oh yeah, and also like is it able to scale? How much more work can it perform? That's a good point. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Very good. Okay.
So the question is, you've done this. What's kind of an auditor going to do if you've applied RPA to a process, an audit process? What's this going to allow the auditor to actually do instead of the work they would have previously done manually?
Right. So this is a very good point that you bring up. So the whole point for having RPA to do this, it's obviously good to leverage technology, but now auditors, the idea would be for them to focus their efforts on more analytical work, right? And this is not just the case for RPA, but in general, this will be the case for moving towards using technology in the audit, right? So why have auditors perform very simple tasks like matching a data element from one file to a different file when the technology can easily do this, right? As long as we can rely on the data. So that's the whole point, is that we have to start rethinking of how we can do this work. So we think that the auditors, essentially the work that auditors will have to perform, it would have to be more analytical and less structured. So moving more towards analytical work.
So does that mean less auditors in the world or more?
I wouldn't say that means less. I think there will be some change in the workforce, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's drastically, eliminating auditors and no auditors are going to have a job. It's just that the type of job that they perform is going to be different.
No, I agree. I just wanted to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay, should I move on?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right, so you can see here the different phases of the audit process, right? So you can think of RPA, Robotic Process Automation, which is here at the bottom, as this overlay software that connects the different phases of the audit process to form a systematic audit approach. So what we like to call it here in the CAR lab is we call it this audit production line, right? So we have the bots perform audit work, but this is able to achieve near end-to-end audit automation, because going back to the point that we just made, we still need auditors to make evaluations about the results of these RPA tests, right? So auditors are still going to be needed to come up with evaluations for control risk, for example, or for control testing effectiveness. All right, so now we're just going to go through a couple of examples as to how RPA could be used for auditing. So the different perspective, not auditing the RPA, but auditing using RPA. So in audit planning, oftentimes we have to complete a checklist to begin our risk assessment process, right? So this consists of checking the box to select the accounts that should be audited based on materiality or perhaps a different threshold. So how can RPA help here, right? So RPA can open the folder where the financial statements or where the trial balance is located. It can automatically open this file and copy and paste the revenue balance in this case, right? So it can copy the revenue balance and it can paste it into an audit work paper template, which calculates whether the balance, the current balance in revenue exceeds the materiality threshold. And subsequently, the RPA can take this information, so it takes the yes, and it can check the box on the planning worksheet. So essentially, the RPA can tell us as auditors what accounts need to be audited. It can do that for us. So now I'm going to pass it on to Abby. She's going to talk about applications of RPA for internal control testing and substantive testing.
Okay, Edward, could you please give me the presentation, right? All right, can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. So thank you, Andrea, for talking about the first part. So here I'm going to show some examples of using RPA in internal audit, internal control, testing, and the substantive procedures. So, so for the first example, it's using RPA in revenue testing. So basically, the idea is to use RPA to replace the auditor to perform the repetitive, mundane, and rule-based tasks in the revenue testing. For example, normally the auditors, they will log into a third-party website to get audit evidence. For example, the purchase order, invoice, shipping lists, and then do some basic comparison. And we can just build a bot to do basically the same thing as what auditors do. So the bot will just mimic the auditor's behavior to log in the website and extract the data they need, and then perform the testing. And the bot can be programmed to do those testing, for example, the matching and the basic calculation. So in the example of the automated revenue three-way match, after the bot extracted the audit evidence, cleaned up the data, and do the basic matching, and it can calculate the percentages of the discrepancies and compare the discrepancy rate with the materiality threshold. And the bot can also be programmed to generate alert if the discrepancy rate exceeds the materiality. So basically, if the underlying task is rule-based, mundane, and repetitive, you can just program the bot to do whatever the auditor used to do. So that's one example in the substantive testing. And we also have one example in using RPA to perform the confirmation procedure. So this is a real example done by Dr. Feiqi Huang, who just graduated from our business school. So what he did is he went to an audit firm and talked to them, and they come up with a use case which can be automated by RPA. And this use case is the cash confirmation process, in which the auditors need to go to the confirmation.com to confirm the cash account balances. And the basic steps are that the auditors first need to prepare a request form and then log into the confirmation.com to search for the client information one by one from the request form, and then extract some data, do some analysis, and then download the corresponding documents and extract some information from those documents. So you can see that the steps are well defined and rule based, and it does not require the auditor's professional judgment. That's why we think this use case is a good one for the RPA application. And
so I was just thinking.
Yes.
I was just thinking of the audit procedures generally. I mean, in many organizations, the policies or the processes are kind of laid out, and they're reasonably documented to a certain extent. But when it comes to audit, I think your department or your function in most organizations is probably an extreme end of having almost everything very, very highly documented before the work starts. So
Yes.
you're in a very good starting position as a profession for that first part of the automation process.
Yes. So this is a good point that you are right that most of the like for the audit procedure, most of the work are well documented. So this actually lays the foundation for the audit automation. For example, in the planning use case that Andrea just presented, so basically the auditors need to complete the document, which is called the planning worksheet, and it is in a structured format. So it provides the potential for the task automation, and also the automation can also facilitate the documentation because the bot can just grab the data and do the calculation and automatically fill in the planning worksheet by predefined rules. So yes, so the documentation lays the, structured documentation lays the foundation for automation, and automation also facilitate better documentation in the audit area.
Okay, great.
Okay. So for the those are the 4 steps in this cash confirmation procedure. And for the first step, the preparation of the request form, so Dr. Feiqi Huang, he did some process redesign here because as you can see from the screen, on the left-hand side, it's the original request form used by the auditors, which is in the Word format. But in order for the bot to search on the website from the request form, it's better to put the information in a spreadsheet format. So he did a process redesign to convert the original request form into this spreadsheet Excel type of request form. This is just for the convenience of the bot, because the bot can just grab data from the Excel much easier than from the Word document. So he did this process redesign. And the process redesign is very important from our other projects of RPA, because sometimes it's not so efficient just to just automate the procedures as they are. Sometimes you need to do some process redesign to realize the full potential of automation. So after he did that process redesign, he basically just programmed the bot to do what the auditors used to do. So he programmed the bot to open the web browser and log into the confirmation.com website, and then programmed the bot to extract the information from the redesigned request form, and basically the following procedures are just those predefined steps that the auditors do. But he just replicate everything by using this bot. And so here's how it looks like on the UIPath software. So the UIPath is just one of the RPA softwares that people can utilize. And in his case, he used this UIPath. So the above two examples are how RPA can be used in internal control testing and also the substantive testing. And then I will introduce how RPA can be used in the final step of the audit procedure, which is completing an audit. So in the audit review procedure, the auditors always need to compare the data of the more previous time period and the latest time period. So basically, you can build a bot to replicate the auditor's actions to log into the third-party website, download for example, the sales listing, and then perform some comparison and to see whether there's any unusual fluctuation of the data. So the example could be, let's say the auditors have two copies of the revenue transactions. So one is for the end of October and another is for the end of December. So in this case, the auditors compare the changes in different time periods and see whether there are any abnormal or unusual fluctuations. And if there are any those abnormal fluctuations, the RPA can be programmed to send alerts to the auditors, and then the auditors will be involved to do some further investigation. So I just want to summarize by saying that, so many people ask me that, so what do you think is the best use case of RPA in the audit procedure? And my answer is that there's no unique answer to this question, because as long as the underlying task is repetitive, rule-based, and standardized, and of course has electronic data input, then this task can be a good candidate for RPA use case. And it doesn't matter where this task sits. So it doesn't matter whether it is in audit planning or in the substantive testing, in the audit review or whatever. So as long as the characteristic of the task meets the criteria, then it can be a good use case for RPA. So to conclude, we just covered two aspects of the RPA in audit. So the first aspect is that since our clients are using RPA in their operational procedures or accounting procedures, then the internal auditors or external auditors should be aware of the risks introduced by the RPA used by clients. So that's the first perspective. And the second perspective is that we think audit profession is like the audit profession can also utilize RPA as one of the audit analytics tool or automation tool to help auditors save the time they spend on doing the mundane and repetitive simple tasks, and to focus their energy on the more complicated and the tasks that require their professional judgment. So that's basically what our presentation is about.
So do you see, I mean, the first question that came up was, what are the barriers to auditors, adopting this technology wholesale, quickly, and at scale? Because it seems like for me, it seems like a no-brainer for auditors to be adopting this. So what's going to hold it up?
You mean what's the obstacles of the prevalence of RPA in audit?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So from our experience, we can see that. So first thing is that the auditors they themselves may have some concern about using RPA, and we already discussed it's mainly because of the regulation, because especially for the public accounting firms, they have more concern about this, because whatever they do in the audit will be reviewed or inspected by the PCAOB. So if the PCAOB does not have a clear or supportive tone in regards to using this kind of technology, the auditors will be very conservative about using these technologies. So I think the main pushback is from the regulations.
And what's happening at the regulatory area level? Are they discussing? I'm sure they're discussing bots, but is there kind of an awareness action, a kind of timeline for when they're going to be fully endorsed?
So the PCAOB actually they say that they do not how to say there's I guess Professor Miklos, do you want to add to this point, because I think you are more clear about that?
Exactly sure what to say about it. The PCAOB is still sitting around and worrying about sampling and etc. Although they set up a task force at our urging, looking at analytic methods, they are very far, and they are a little bit worried about blockchain. They are very, very far from thinking about audit automation and methods and the reframing of audit automation. So I don't think at this moment we can think too much about the PCAOB. I think they'll deal with it when there is a fait accompli, when there is substantive amount of internal audit and some external audit being done by robots.
Right.
But in the meantime, so it's interesting. So there's a sort of fait accompli presented, but in the meantime, is there anything to prevent individual public accounting bodies or internal audit functions within corporations? Is there anything to prevent them from adopting these technologies?
Let's say the following, that's my opinion, not substantiated by facts yet, is that you're going to find a lot of corporations. We talked about two of them actually, reasonably large, that have staff that are RPA staff. And they are picking up things that they think is labor intensive and creating little robots to do it without asking too much in internal audit. If you look at, and we just saw a paper by David Wood and his colleagues at Brigham Young, that he inquired around the Big Four, what they are doing. And basically the finding was they are doing hundreds of bots, but basically as internal audit tool. They are not doing many and a little bit in tax, but they are not doing a lot of bots in external audit yet.
Right.
And do you see any industries or even nations or countries that are further ahead in their adoption of bots for either side of the audit story you've been talking about?
No, I don't think so. I think, although there is a lot of voice about the Chinese being ahead of the US, I'd be very, very surprised if they are doing anything that we are not doing, or even close to what's being done in J&J, Siemens, other companies that already started on this path. It's very interesting because we talk to large companies, and they are not surprised about robotic process automation. They're more asking when, how, and how much does it cost. And then you talk about PCAOB, or you talk with the audit, and they are in a total different frequency. They are not even thinking too much of it. One of the firms seem to be doing a little bit more.
And just on the firms, do you see them joined up internationally, doing this as kind of a cross-firm initiative, or do you see individual countries, doing their own thing in the short term before they join up globally?
I think that's going to be very heterogeneous. I haven't seen any of the firms, unless they are very secretive about having a major robotic process automation initiative in their external audit practices. I think that one of the problems is that they realize it doesn't take a genius to realize that it's going to really cut costs of performing audits. So eventually we're going to the fee schema, and they don't particularly want to see fees being cut. And so I think that there is some there is some hesitation there. I think what's going to happen is some smaller firm or firms that is not very big in a particular industry is going to say, I don't have a lot to lose, I'm going to automate a lot here, and then bid very low for business. And then the pressures are going to grow. And I expect them, when they start growing, to grow fast.
Okay, so one of the things that you didn't talk about that you had talked about in our preliminary conversations was, I think the phrase was perpetual audit.
Continuous audit.
Sorry, continuous audit. Do you want to just spend a couple of minutes talking through that and how RPA can feed into that?
Yeah, well, happy to do that. I started this project on continuous audit at Bell Laboratories in the mid-80s. And the first continuous audit application that we know of was AT&T billing system. We published a paper in 91 about it. Since then, both the ICPA and the IIA and ISACA came out with some kind of guidance in this line. Now, what we predicted and what we actually developed there, and then in a bank in Brazil called Unibanco, it's sat around for a while, but now two of the big four have a practice, what they call continuous auditing practice, but they are not adopting continuous audit for obvious reasons. In the external audit, they are really kind of consulting to internal audit department to do a more frequent audit. Several of them have been, several firms now say that they do continuous audit. We have a little bit of a terminology disagreement with them. Doing an audit at the end of the year and then redoing it 10 times a year or 5 times a year is not a continuous audit. What we see a continuous auditing being is a totally driven by automation verification process that's an overlay on corporate regular processes. And what we have seen in technological development and ubiquity of telecommunication, like the internet, has created a whole new scenario of what can be done. If you look at the dissertations of our PhD students, they are doing a lot of predictive audit, machine learning, etc., etc. And in the RPA effort is very, very interesting because we were part of the AICPA's audit data standard, and now we're basically arguing that RPA's efforts have to have a data standard to homogenize different data flows. And if you homogenize data flows, there is no reason to do an audit or a verification process once a year. You can do it nearly constantly and monitor exceptions. Now, there are a lot of conceptual things that arise out of this because when you say, well, that's not an audit, that's a meta control. That's just a question of terminology. Also, it doesn't fit very well in the traditional 4 stages of the audit. Is actually works in kind of integrated way of risk assessment and at the same time analytical substantive test and etc. Like a review substantive test and etc. But I think the ecosystem of data, interfaces of data standard, analytics running constantly, predictive analytics, and basically interrupting before the transactions go into downstream processes is something that is ready to happen. And part of this ecosystem is going to be substantial automation using what we call today RPA and what we'll call in the future IPA, RPA, and other forms of automation. Sorry, I'm a little bit lecturing here.
That's fascinating. I mean, I guess it's kind of easy to pick up your passion, but also, you know, the difference between where your mind's going and where your team's research is going, where the kind of the real world is. I mean, what I wanted to close on was just for each of the three of you, if you maybe give prediction of the one thing you think will change in the next 12 to 18 months in this area.
No, I think that there be adoption of small RPA steps. I call it baby steps, whereby certain things that take a lot of labor will be automated. And I think the pressure to the external auditors will come from seeing the internal audit using these tools and the client saying, why the hell don't you use this thing? It's more consistent, it's cheaper, and you can do things that you can't do manually.
Abby, what's your prediction for the next 12 or 18 months?
Well, I agree with Professor Miklos that more and more baby steps could be taken by firms or internal audit functions or external auditors. And for longer term, I think there will be a shift in the types of work that auditors do because we see the trend of where the basic and repetitive steps will be taken over by bots. So the auditors will be required to have higher level skills, for example, the critical thinking, creativity, or like whatever high level analytic skills that you can name of. So that's my prediction. Yeah.
Andrea, Mike, I'll tailor the question for you. Is just given all these new technologies and given the historical skills of auditors, how do you see the audit profession evolving to have the right skills to actually apply these technologies?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, but just to give you my opinion on that, there's a lot of talk, at least from what we're hearing at the firms may be looking for in terms of hiring. Some may want a data scientist and then to teach them auditing skills. Others may want someone with auditing skills and then to teach them, the data science knowledge that they need. So I definitely think the auditing curriculum should change, or I guess the accounting curriculum in general. But I do not necessarily think that accountants or soon-to-be accountants need to be experts in statistics or experts in blockchain, RPA, etc. What I do think is that we do need to emphasize more of those new technologies in the accounting curriculum, and for these soon-to-be accounting or audit hires to have these very basic skills to be able to understand, like, what is the RPA technology and how could I use it potentially in an audit, and what are some of the risks that I will need to understand and evaluate for a client that uses RPA, and also have some more applied knowledge, right? So introduce perhaps the case study methodology to be able to provide these students with the hands-on skills that they would need to perform audits of blockchain or RPA, but also to perform audits using these technologies.
Okay, excellent. So I think we'll all get back together in exactly 365 days to see what's happened in the coming 12 months. But in the meantime, I mean, first of all, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's a completely fascinating area, and it's good. It's a real insight into how one profession is going to be radically changed by RPA, and how it's also going to adapt what it does to RPA happening in the functions it works with. So thank you very, very much. If anyone's got any questions for the team, feel free to route them through.
Just one point, Edward. I think Abby can send you David Wood's paper, which is he basically surveyed the Big Four what they are doing. And I think people that attended the seminar, this is a draft paper, but I think he made it public. You should be able to share them with anyone. It's a very interesting paper.
Right, fantastic. We'll put it out in the newsletter as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, Edward, and thank you for whoever is attending this webcast.
Perfect, excellent. All right, take care. Thank you very much.
Guys.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.